Hey everybody, welcome to the Back to Brilliance podcast. We're your hosts, Henry and Joseph. Thanks for tuning in. We ask that wherever you listen, that you subscribe, leave a comment or a review. It helps great people like you find our podcast. And with that, today we're getting into an episode which is called The Comfort Illusion and How Safety Becomes the Enemy. In this episode, we're going to cover how early wins. After early wins, many entrepreneurs fall into the trap of maintaining instead of multiplying. So with that, guys, I want to bring in our co-host, Joseph. Joseph, say what's up. Take it away, bro.
Hey, everybody. How's it going? So I wanted to start today with just talking about, the illusion of external security, right? Kind of the illusion of external validation, how entrepreneurs, they often mistake validation or approval or even financial backing for stability, right? But they're very fragile. They're very fragile forms of comfort that really cap your potential, because if you're constantly seeking from the external, there's only so much that you can seek from it, unless you're seeking from within, which we'll get into later on. But I just wanted to cover how seeking the external is a trap.
Absolutely. And it happens, when we first start out, right? We say like fake it till you make it type thing, you know what I mean? And then once you get out there, and that stems from just starting. Once you get out there, a lot of times we do get stuck in that external security when somebody congratulates you, and you feel like you get stuck in those traps. And a lot of times we look at those as validation of who we are, so it's kind of like a emotional dependency on that validation, so many founders base their self-worth on how clients and investors or audiences respond to the work that they do, so sometimes that external praise, it becomes like a drug, it's and that's kind of like what happens, when they don't praise you or they get upset, it begins to fade, and when it fades because you're not getting that external validation anymore, your motivation begins to dwindle, in the process.
Yeah, I completely agree. And that's kind of happened to me where, I early on, whenever I was doing more graphic design work, I would feel really high or really good whenever, someone was like, oh, I really like this design. I really like how you did this and that. But then whenever they would give me some criticism or some negative feedback, like, no, that's not what I wanted. We got to change things up, or, hey, I have an idea to completely change the project, right? Well, then I would, feel very discouraged, and I would not really want to do it, because it's like, okay, well, now I feel like I'm doing a bad job. Whereas, if I were to detach myself from that, this is just my service that I'm offering. And that's kind of what I want to say to everyone listening is, don't feel like you need to depend on what other people are saying. You're doing a service for people. You're being of service for people, and let it just be that, right? Don't put your value or your self-worth on how good of a product you give. Granted, you can try to give a better product and have confidence in giving a good product, but it's not on the other end. It's not on the external end. It's more so on your internal end.
Right. And that's the thing. I mean, you always should show up 100%. You know what I mean? Like, you hear people say, oh, give 110, 120, 100. You can't. You can only give 100%. That's the max, So always give 100% in everything you do. Build that long-term, it's going to build that long-term confidence, but that confidence only comes from having that integrity, so use your word, your word is like your bond, you know what I'm saying? So like, don't get caught up in that emotional dependency, guys, is what we're trying to come up with, so, the external people that are trying to validate who you are is not how things really work in the real world, so don't get too caught up in external security, because it's just an illusion, when you depend on people to dictate your validation and your worth, so
Exactly. And, this kind of goes into the financial or relational dependency, right? And I've kind of fallen into this trap too this year where it's like, okay, like I need to make money. I want to make the desired amount that I have in my head, right? I want to make X dollars per month. I want to, but that is still seeking from the external. You're still being like, okay, what I have right now is not good enough. I want this instead. And that will have you constantly be in a rat race because it's like, okay, well, once you make that amount of money, well, then you're going to want to make more money because now, you realize, okay, well, that amount of money wasn't enough because I have new bills, I got a new car, I got a new house, I have a girlfriend or husband, wife, whatever, you know. And so now it's like, okay, well, that initial goal that I had that I spent, all my time and effort and energy trying to seek and achieve, well, now I got it, but now it's not enough. And then you keep moving the goalposts. So then that just puts you in a, financial dependency, or entrepreneurs who depend too heavily on others. Uh, you know, People like, for me, for example, I've had this before as well, where I would feel good whenever my friend group felt good, and I would feel bad when my friend group felt bad, right? Or even like Henry was just saying, seeking other people's approval, right? Maybe you're not getting as much approval this week, so then your motivation and your drive starts to wane, and that is still seeking from the external. Versus, you charge your own inner battery, right? You say, okay, I'm going to show up 100% today and tomorrow and the next day, regardless of, if I'm getting a pat on the back, or regardless on if my client is being negative this week.
Right. No, absolutely. And that's the thing. So, yeah, that financial thing, here's the reality. Finance is always going to change. You know what I mean? So, whatever the circumstance is. So, but in entrepreneurship, that's just the boat that you're sailing in. That's why you gave up the 9 to 5, So, but you learn in these things, and yet, which takes us to the next step. Sometimes we can even get into that, ego's hidden trap, where our ego, I did this, it's like this, So ego disguises itself sometimes as ambition, but it thrives on attention, and, that's where we fall into these traps because, sometimes our ego takes us that way. Like when somebody tells you you're doing a good job, or, oh, wow, 5 other people have tried it and they couldn't do it and you did it, So sometimes people do use that to puff you up, in all actuality, and they'll use that because they know how, and then they're looking for that discount because they, fed your ego and that was more important to you, than the dollar. So sometimes when you don't see the dollar, and I'm telling you that from, exampleship when I first started, when people would give me that attaboy, I was like, oh man, yeah, like I'm the man, and they asked for like, oh yeah, you think I can get a discount? Well, because I wasn't confident in my validation and stuff, like, yeah, that's cool, and after a while, like, it just became a pattern. And that's the problem, is that it's not their fault, it's your fault because you're training your clients this way. You're teaching them that it's okay to keep asking you for that discount. Well, if you keep giving discounts, eventually you're going to be discounted out of the business, So take these words that we're teaching you and we're showing and we're sharing, because it's by exampleship. You know what I mean? I've been down this road, so I can tell you from experience that, sometimes that those things happen. And I was young, so I was ambitious, I was excited, I was like, oh man, I'm the man, I'm saving the world. And then, as time went on, you start to recognize, like, when people take advantage of that, because, that's just how business is. I'll be honest and transparent with you guys. This is just the way things work in the real world, is that you have some good people out there, but you have some bad eggs too, so, and they recognize this. So the point is that don't let ego drive you, don't get, in those traps, those illusion traps.
I agree. And, a good way to get yourself out of those traps is, drive make your drive come from a system, right? That way it's like, every day, or every day I'm going to do this task, regardless of, X, Y, or Z. That way, you get into the rhythm of, okay, today I do this, today I do that, today, or, now I do this, now I do that, right? That way it's not dependent on the external. It's like, okay, well, I was going to do this anyway, right? I was going to I was going to do client work at this time anyway. I was going to do outreach at this time anyway. Versus, oh, well, I'm only going to do client outreach when I'm in a good mood, but that's just not realistic or sustainable. And so, that in itself is kind of leads us to our next point, which is the prison of comforts, right? So comfort, it's safety, but for an entrepreneur, it's a subtle killer of creativity and momentum. And I could speak firsthand for that because, there are times where, especially whenever I was doing more freelancing, graphic design and video editing, I would just seek comfort. I would just be like, okay, well, I have 2 clients now. They're paying my bills, and I would just do that. And it wouldn't. I wasn't really growing. I was just kind of staying afloat. And so, because I found comfort in that, and so, comfort will be your ceiling, right? If you're never trying to push or try to stretch out your skills or where you're at in life, that will be your new ceiling.
Yeah, no, definitely. And if you feel like you've gotten in a place in your life where you're like comfort and, how did I get here? What happened? There's a good book called Who Moved My Cheese? I think the guy's name is Dr. Spencer or something. But check that little book out. It's a little, probably 1 hour read, but it talks about that, about getting comfortable in one spot. You know what I mean? So, comfort, oh man, that is the enemy of motivation for sure, and creativity, and momentum, so a lot of times it's okay to take a little break, but don't get comfortable. And when we're talking about comfort, we're not just talking about like lazy. We're talking about you've hit that threshold where like, okay, I'm making the money that I want, so again, that's falling into that trap of, that financial, reliability. Like, all right, I got X amount of clients, I'm cool, I can do these little things, but, it's always about pushing through, guys, because that comfort level, let me tell you, I've been to comfort, and, when you get uncomfortable, it's a hard thing to get back going. So it's easier once you're up and running and everything's going to just keep pushing, especially like after early wins, a lot of times we tend to slow down, and just kind of do like maintenance and stay maintaining, and which is kind of just existing. You're not really living, you know what I mean? So you gotta keep pushing, keep expanding, keep growing, every day, guys. You have to take that time to invest in yourself. When you have a win, celebrate it. We've talked about that before. Listen to some of our previous podcasts, and we broke that down, about just celebrating the little wins, even if it's just going to Starbucks and getting yourself a little, coffee, and just like celebrating that win and keep pushing, So, I would say, it's don't get too comfortable, guys, because it becomes a prison.
Exactly. And another type of comfort is avoidance. And this is something that I'm still really, really, really working on this year, is avoidance, right? So, I started at the beginning of the year doing cold calls, and I really avoided it. And it really put me in a state of paralysis, right? Because, the way I set up my funnel for, trying to reach out to people and get clients was all reliant on me cold calling people. And so if I was not cold calling people, then I wasn't growing my business, right? So, that created a cycle of paralysis. And, fear is the reason why we avoid, because, we're trying to avoid that uncomfortable feeling of, calling from a 1-800 number that no one knows. And, I'm kind of elaborating on the narrative or story that I have around it. But again, there are things that you have to do regardless of if you're afraid of it or not, or if you want to avoid it or not, right? Because, if we're an entrepreneur, which all of us are, we're going to have to do stuff that we don't like. And that's something that my coach has told me about. My business / life coach has told me, is like, there's going to be things in your business that you don't like doing, right? If you own a physical brick and mortar place, maybe you have to sweep them up a couple times a week, right? And, you're like, oh, well, I'm doing this, but I don't want to sweep them up. Well, that's just part of you're owning your business, right? And so avoiding those things will really hurt you in the long term.
Absolutely, and that's the thing, guys. Every decision that that you create a delay in your day and whatever you have to do, it begins to compound, and then you just feel like, oh man, like, at the end of the day, I didn't accomplish what I set out to do today. I didn't do this. I didn't do that. So you begin to, it beats you down. So like, the point is like, if it's something you don't want to do, there's a reason why you don't want to do it. Right. And you got to sit back and like, don't take a whole lot of time. It's just like, why don't I want to do it? Just question it. Why don't I want to do it? Oh, because it's going to take this or it's going to take that. It's like, okay, cool. But once you get it off your plate, then everything else for that day seems a little bit easier, So that's what we talk about. Tackle the hard things early while you have the energy, So you're not thinking about it. Just like, hey, I just got to get it done. Who likes to work out in the morning? I don't. I'm not going to sit here and say, oh yeah, it's the highlight of my day. No, dude. But I know that throughout the day, it gives me energy, gives me a little bit of focus, little clarity. You know what I mean? It's for the long term of your health. You know what I mean? So it's not like I'm out there doing training for Olympics, but, do my little, regimen real quick, little 15, 20 minutes and it helps. So, we're talking about avoidance, the decisions that bring paralysis, guys. And when paralysis sets in, a lot of times it kind of goes in this order. It's like, you're hustling, you get a good customer, everything's going pretty good. Hey, I can just take a little, break. I can chill, you get comfortable. And then once you get comfortable, that's where avoidance starts to set in. That's where the paralysis begins to kick in. So if you find yourself in paralysis, you'll be able to trace back through the steps that we just talked about, and you'll see at some point in time, you've allowed those things to creep in, and that's what sets the paralysis. Because when you're busy, you don't have time to be thinking about, oh, should I avoid this? Should I not? It's just like, let me just get it done. Let me get it out of the way. It's got to get done. It's got to get done, So every decision that you delay, it compounds into lost time, lost opportunity, and eventually you lose your confidence, and it does happen, guys. I've been there, I pulled we called it the funk, right? Get out of your funk. That's what we labeled it. But it's kind of like when you're down and out, you have to find a way. So it's always good to have people, to have tools, use this podcast, other podcasts like this, reach out. That's why we have our community, so those type of things like that, just really take the time, to examine, but don't get, comfortable.
Exactly. And that kind of leads us into our last topic, which is, the path of inner mastery, right? That's kind of what all of this is about. This is what our podcast is about, is, the inner mastery, right? Kind of, bring yourself back to it, bring yourself out of the funk. And how do you do that? Well, you have to master yourself. You have to master, how you think and feel about things. And so, entrepreneurship is an inner game, right? It's the inner journey, the inner struggle. My life coach talks about this, the way that you do one thing is how you do everything, right? Mm-hmm. And so the way that you deal with, rejection in a call is how you deal with rejection on a date, right? Because it's all intertwined, because it's all your internal journey. And so, success mirrors the depth of your internal growth and emotional resilience. And so within saying that, embrace the constructive discomfort, right? One thing that I was recommended at one point, whenever I did like a a psychological or like a behavioral, cognitive behavioral training, whatever you want to say. They said as a practice, go to a restaurant or go whenever you're in the next checkout line. Just ask, can I get this for free? Like, you don't have to ask for the whole order, but it's just like, hey, can I get this item for free? Or, if you're at Starbucks, hey, can I get this for free? Deal with them being like, what? Like, deal with that discomfort of them being like, what are you talking about? Because that in itself is embracing the discomfort.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the thing. It's just disrupting patterns, because a lot of times that's what we live by, just the patterns, and sometimes that we try to avoid discomfort because it's uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And again, that's what I'm talking about. It's like it's just unfamiliar ground. So when you're comfortable, that's familiar ground. So you're settling. That's what you can actually call that word. Comfort is settling, for whatever that norm is at the time. So you don't, as an entrepreneur, you can never settle, my friend. You always have to keep pushing through. You always have to keep growing. You're going to get tired. You need to take a break, but get back on it. You know what I mean? Like, don't stay in that comfort level too long. You have to discover this inner mastery, So growth always comes with friction. You need to learn to interpret the discomfort. You know what I mean? Like, understand it's not danger. It's for your growth, So when things feel uncomfortable, just like that muscle, like you work out, like, oh, okay, cool. You didn't feel it then, but then tomorrow you're like, oh, my arm is so sore. I can't even lift them, but what's the thing is to continue, so you build it up and get to another level of, of growth, that's what it's all about. It's about just growing in the process.
Exactly. And every challenge is a mental gym session if you want to look at it like that,
True.
right? And so, more so just shifting the focus from self to service, right? So instead of being like, okay, I'm offering this is my, this is my product, or this is whatever, right? More so be like, okay, this is my product that I'm offering as a service to people. I'm of service. That's why they call it service, right? A service-based business, because you're being of service to people. And so, you can stop asking yourself or thinking about how can I win and start thinking about it as how can I help, right? Being of service, right? Instead of being internal or external, now you're turning it to internal, because it's like, okay, well, I just want to help people. Not that, oh, I need to get my product out or I need to get my service out. It's like, okay, well, I just want to help others, right? And so service-focused entrepreneurs build deeper trust. Because again, it's no longer about how can I get this dollar? How can I get this, external thing? It's more so, a more internal thing of how can I help someone?
And here's the thing. Here's reality. People don't pay for your service. They pay for the solution that you can provide through your service to help them. So, when you shift your focus from me trying to get money, me trying to like, hey, if I do this takes care of my bills, to more of, if I help these people, if I do these things, it's going to build this trust. It's going to build that, that relationship. It's going to build all these things, and happy customers always refer, So the thing is when you go into to business as an entrepreneur, at the end of the day, we got bills to pay. I'm with you. But as you start to build up these wins and everything, and you build these relationships, the primary focus from the get-go should be about service. Like, your product or service should actually be helping somebody, and that's going to help you to continue to grow. So definitely, guys, again, we just talked about like the comfort of illusion. Just watch it, because the things that become enemies of growth is that emotional dependency, and validation from others, which can, put you in a position, where, you're not growing anymore. You're only doing it for their approval, their attaboy, or relying on money, and that dependency, just like, oh man, I got to do X amount, don't get behind that emotion of doing things because of money. Again, we're talking about the service, providing that service. And trust me, when you bring solutions to people's problems, you're going to get paid. There's no doubt about it. And avoid that ego, hidden trap, the prison of comfort, definitely. Again, if you're in that place right now where you feel like, things are kind of cool, I'm just taking it easy. Telling you what follows that is that, analysis paralysis, you start to overthink things, so just build that confidence, guys. That's what our main thing is here, is like, don't put your confidence in all these things. You need to, master the path, of, that inner growth. So get involved, join communities, find like-minded people, stay plugged in. Yeah, listen to podcasts like this and others, So with that, guys, I want to bring Joseph back on if he has any closing thoughts for what we talked about.
Yeah, again, like Henry just said, right? It's all about mastering your inner journey, because then that will expand to your outer journey, right? That famous saying of, if I know myself, or I forgot exactly how it goes, but if you master yourself, then you master everything, right? And so, I just want to give a shout out to our community. If you're an entrepreneur tired of doing everything alone, we have a community that combines practical self-growth tools as well as community support and weekly structure to help you stay focused and follow through with whatever you're trying to do. So that's at backtoBrilliance.com. If you go down to the community section, it'll be linked up with like-minded people like you.
Well said. All right, guys. Well, thank you for tuning in to our podcast. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a comment or a review. It helps great people like you find our podcast. And with that, we're out until the next time. Stay blessed.
Bye-bye.